As it's been stated, we are just a few miles away from Rosewood. And Rosewood, the murder and massacre in Rosewood was not done just for Africans in Rosewood. It was to establish and maintain an example of terror that would prevent any African anywhere in this country from ever resisting. And I think the stance that Eric took and the courage of his family, even now, is extraordinarily important. And that we should recognize that and offer whatever support that we can give to Eric and to his family, in part for the courage that they have demonstrated, and also to demonstrate to Eric and his family that they do not stand alone. No. That resistance is good. That resistance is necessary. And we have a responsibility to resist. We have a responsibility to resist. And that we owe that to everybody that died in Rosewood and every African that has yet to be born. We have to establish this kind of example, because our oppressors will continue to oppress us if they do not have to pay a consequence. And Eric demonstrated that you have to pay a consequence. If you knock on my door saying, come out, and begin to drag members of my family, of friends of ours, out of the house to do something to them, you will pay a consequence. It is correct that he did that. It is responsible that he did that. Now, this is the first mobilization that we've done here in Bronson, but it's not going to be the last demonstration. It is important that we did this because for some people it's harder to support Eric Oliver than it was to support Trayvon. Trayvon is dead. A lot of people can support African victims. They can support dead Africans. A lot of people can support somebody who looks like they could have been Obama's son. Nobody would mistake Eric Oliver for Obama's son. You won't make that mistake. And we understand that there was a message when Obama said that he could have been my son. There was a message there, because little Trayvon Martin, murdered in Sanford, Florida, little light-skinned fella who seemed to have been harmless, that was something that anybody could appreciate. But Eric is not a little light-skinned fella who appears to be harmless. He is jet black. Africa, the Congo you can see the Congo in every aspect of his features. He would not be mistaken for Barack Obama's son. He is a son of Africa that stood up right here in Bronson. And that is a very powerful thing that just happened. So we got a lot of people who, as long as you're dead, as long as you look harmless, as long as you look like a victim, they're willing to support you if you're black. But if you stand up and resist, then it takes a little time for them to get accustomed to the idea that you should support. Because the contradiction, the problem that many people have, is that an example of Eric Oliver should become generalized throughout the African community, throughout the African world. That everybody would stand up and act just like Eric Oliver acted. So we believe that it's important to support him and to stand up with him. That's a really important example. More than that, I think the stance of Eric Oliver should be understood, again, in the context of the history, not just of this area, not just of Rosewood, but the history of our people in this country. It's not like Africans, once upon a time, a few hundred years ago, decided that, look, 400, 500 years from now, they're going to be recruiting people into the NFL. Let's get a jump on it and leave early, and then popped up in this country. We are here as a consequence of Africa coming under attack. I think it's important to say this because people like to talk about this country as a nation of immigrants. First of all, America is not a nation, it's a prison of nations. Secondly, Africans in this country are not immigrants, we are captives. That is something that must be understood. We are the only group of people in this country, other than the original inhabitants, who did not come to America looking for a better way of life. We lost a better way of life as a consequence of having been dragged here to America. More than that, Because people like to talk about the civil rights movement and let's get civil rights and things like that. But our struggle is not against some imaginary racism in the heads of white people. The idea is in the heads of white people. That is insanity. I mean, the thing is, how do you fight against the ideas in the heads of white people? And the reality is that we are struggling for power over our own lives. We're struggling for the power to control our lives. So notwithstanding what is in the heads of white people, they cannot do anything to harm us, and then we can determine the life that our children are going to have. The struggle is for power. The struggle is that African people have a right to be in control of our own lives, no matter what white people think about us. So I wouldn't spend 20 seconds trying to have a demonstration or march to get white people to like us. In fact, what in the hell do I look like? Being victimized, being enslaved, being tortured, being raped. The whole continent of Africa turned into a place for the development of slaves to try to get the slave master to like me. It's the slave master that should be on his belly crawling to me, asking for forgiveness and saying, please, please, won't you change your mind about the attitude that you have about me? Isn't that right? It doesn't make any sense. So we are struggling for power. The other thing I want to say is, when a press conference was done in Gainesville about this, a reporter for the Gainesville Sun said that, don't you think it's an exaggeration to say that it was a lynch mob coming to attack him? Well, the guy claims, I understand in retrospect, that a car that Mikey was driving came close to a child or something to that effect, and they were upset. So you say it's not a lynch mob. If somebody comes and knocking on the door, and if that's the reason they're knocking, they are not the police. They're not the police knocking on the door. They didn't send the police to knock on the door. They came knocking on the door using profanity, said, bring him out. Send him out of the house. So you tell me what it was, if it was not a lynch mob. Our history and our relationship to white people banging on the door says send him out, suggests that it's a lynch mob. Again, it was not the police that came. They didn't send the police. The only time they came to get the police is after Mikey did due diligence, after he knocked them out in the yard. Then they went to get the police to finish up what they couldn't do themselves. That's why we say that the pigs and the Klan work hand in hand. What the Klan couldn't do at the door, then they send the police to come and do it for them. So it's really important for us to understand this. What kind of stand your ground laws are we talking about? They create, first of all, a stand your ground law in the state of Florida to justify the execution of African people in the streets of this country, of the state of Florida. Everybody knows that's what the stand your ground law was all about in the first place. Then they used the stand your ground law, they tried to, as the justification for gunning down Trayvon Martin. Been a big debate among lawyers about whether or not the case should have even, this guy should have even been tried, whether he should have even been charged because of the stand your ground law. That's what they said. They said if the guy was fearful for his life, he had a right to shoot him, to shoot Trayvon as he did, even though he's the one following Trayvon. He followed him, he chased Trayvon, gunned him down, and claimed he did it because he was standing his own ground. Yet you have a mob of white people who can knock on somebody's door, knock on their door, demanding that people come out, and then when they came out knocking them out, right? And stand your ground doesn't work now. Somehow there's something wrong with the defense of standing your ground. In this instance, somebody has come to his door to do harm. We have to build a movement. We have to build a revolutionary movement. Because what we are looking at here in this country, what Eric has just demonstrated, is that the world is changing. And everybody needs to understand that the world has changed. This is not Rosewood anymore, where you can come up and frighten African people and keep them from fighting back. Eric Oliver is simply an example of a transformed world. Nobody in the world is laying down anymore. We live in a country, first of all, that's stolen land from the indigenous population here that nobody even talks about because they're in concentration camps that they call Indian reservations. They don't even get mentioned if they're not there. We live in a country where there's no apology, no even recognition of the significance of the indigenous people here. This is the America that we are talking about. All the wealth that you see here, all the wealth in Bronson and throughout this country, first of all, is on a land mass that was stolen. It is stolen land. All the people who came here looking for a better way of life came looking for that better way of life on stolen land. Every address on every house in Bronson and throughout this country rests upon a mailbox on stolen land, first of all. Secondly, the value, the industry, the political economy of this country and the world was created of slavery and colonialism. All the wealth that you see in this country, the capitalism that they say they're spending more than $1 trillion to defend when murdering people in Iraq, murdering people in Afghanistan, murdering people in Palestine, trying to having a whole military occupation with AFRICOM on the continent of Africa. All of that is responsible for the wealth that you see here and throughout Europe and North America. So people are fighting back. The reason Bush initiated this military campaign, the reason we are engaged right now in a war without end is because the peoples whose land and resources America was built on, Europe was built on, capitalism itself was built on, the people are taking back their resources, taking back their land. You want to understand the real reason there's a problem with the economy of America? It's not just because of housing or something like that. It is because it is a parasitic capitalist economy that rests upon the exploitation of value that's being stolen throughout the world, and the peoples of the world are fighting back to take their resources. Eric Oliver stood up right here in Bronson to fight back as well. That's why we have to support him. Let's build a movement. Let's build a revolutionary movement. Let's build a movement to overturn a rotten, foul social system that's born of slavery, genocide, and colonialism. Let's replace it with a system where human beings can live, can look each other in the eye, not as bosses and workers and slave masters, but as equals on this earth, equal as a consequence of having overturned a social system based on slavery. So we're going to have a rally understanding of the church. I think it's really important. I think it's important for us to be here because the first mobilization like this in Bronson, by being here, we're sort of a vanguard. We let all the other Africans who are in Bronson know that it's all right to take a stand. We let all the Africans know that you don't have to be cowards. Yes. That's what Eric tried to tell them on the 12th. Yes. You don't have to be a coward. You don't have to lay down when somebody comes and demands that you bring somebody or send somebody out of the house. Let's help the Africans here. This march will help them to understand that. Yes. The next march, there'll be more because they see what happened on this one. Yes. And the presence of white people here should help white people in this rotten, foul system and city understand that you can take a stand too. That you can take a stand, you can follow your best instincts and not be led around by your pocketbooks and your stomachs and by the assumptions of some mad, insane assumption of some kind of superiority. But you can help the white people to take a stance by your presence here too. So let's go to the church. I am an organizer. I am a revolutionary. I am here to build the African People's Socialist Party, to build the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement, because in the final analysis, Africans will not know freedom unless we have the power in our own hands. And we're calling on everybody who can ally with us, everybody who hate what they call racism, everybody who hate what they call Jim Crow, to stand on the side and support the African movement to take the power of our lives into our own hands. Uhuru.